Now this is just a reminder. This is the Roman Republic's territory before Pompey went to the east. After Pompey finished his campaigns against the pirates in the east, this is what the Roman Republic controls now. They've come a long way since our first video when they were just a Roman city on the Tiber River. Now remember, we're in the section of the decline of the Republic. This is chapter 10, Julius Caesar. Now let's get back to the situation. Pompey, he came back to Italy after reorganizing the east. He disbanded his armies and entered Rome as a private citizen. He had only 2 requests of the Senate, which were very acceptable requests, but Lucullus, remember, he was in the east before he was bounced by Pompey. He's now a tribune, and he lobbied the Senate against Pompey's request. And that was going very well. So they weren't even granting Pompey's request. Now, you also have a man in Italy, Marcus Crassus, and he was simply the richest man in Rome, but was having problems with the aristocratic party's heavy taxes. Anyone would want Crassus as an ally, with his wealth on their side. And then steps in Gaius Julius Caesar, and he simply wanted to be the man with all the power. Now, when he returned from Spain, he was made consul with the help of Pompey and Crassus, and procured for himself a command in Gaul and Illyria once his consulship was up. As consul, he helped Pompey's bills get passed that he was trying to pass in the Senate that Lucullus was blocking. And these bills were for his soldiers. And Caesar had also taken Pompey's unemployed soldiers and employed them in his command in Gaul in the coming years. Now, in 59, Caesar wished to obtain consulship again, but since he was in Gaul, the Senate refused because anyone running for consul had to run and be in Rome. But these 3 characters were allied politically by the sheer fact that they were all against the constitution that Sulla had put in place and against the Senate that was dominated by the aristocratic class. Now, these 3 decided to work together to further their own ambitions. Now, after Caesar's consulship, he obtained the 5-year command in Gaul, which again was unheard of. Proconsuls, they were the governors of territories. Usually the command was for 3 years, but he obtained a 5-year command. Now, these 3 men so far were getting what they wanted and decided to form an alliance. And this is what actually helped Caesar obtain the consulship. In return, Caesar did what Crassus and Pompey wanted also. But by 59 and 58 BC, Caesar was in Transalpine Gaul. Now, Caesar at this point was broke, and it is commonly believed he wanted to start a war in Illyria to gain wealth. But just then, word came that the Helvetii tribe was migrating from Switzerland to Gaul, and this is the chance Caesar was looking for. Now, there's a lot of discussion on Caesar about whether his skill and military capabilities were remarkable or if he was just lucky. So I like to give some insight to the person's character, like I try to do with Pompey, and give credit where credit is due. Now, due to the lack of time, I can't go into great detail, but I just try to give a few examples. So I will try to shed some light on Caesar's character briefly. Now, Caesar, he was involved in the Eastern Wars in the 60s, and he achieved distinction in those wars. Now, Suetonius, the historian Suetonius, he records that Caesar had a homosexual relationship with the Bithynian king. But Suetonius, he was notably addicted to scandal. Now, at any rate, Caesar seems to have left the military for a political career like Crassus did. However, he found that military command and victory were prerequisites for political success. Now, by marriage, he was connected to the popular party, but the Julius family was as old as Rome itself. Caesar studied literature at Rhodes so he could talk to the aristocrats on equal terms, but this meant that both sides distrusted him. His early career was nothing short of political manipulative violence, apologist for disreputable causes, and a demagogue of the kind Rome only knew too much about. Suetonius also lists the Roman ladies whom he is said to seduce, including Pompey and Crassus's wives. Now, to promote his political plans, he borrowed heavily from Crassus, who ran a political financial business. In return, Caesar was at his disposal. But Caesar had insight into realities that maybe even Cicero didn't, that the real ruler of Rome was Pompey and the army he had behind him for support. All the constitutionalism that was outworn or had been violently imposed by Sulla was a facade. Pompey actually let that illusion persist because he was not a politician and only wanted to be Rome's best general. Now, Caesar obtained a military command in Spain in 61 and had the 7th, 8th, 9th, and 10th legions there with him that he retained with him in Gaul. And even though Spain was pacified, there was still hill tribes that were raiding provinces, and Caesar showed in his middle age his military genius was still with him, fighting the Lusitanians, and got rich off the slaves and spoils of war. When he got back to Rome, he paid off Crassus and was looking to be a general as great as Pompey. Now, he kept his 4 legions with him in Gaul and was said to have known them all on a personal level. Remember, Caesar understood it was the army that really gave you the power. We're going to go to chapter 11. Okay, we just covered Julius Caesar briefly. Chapter 11 is the first Triumvirate. In Rome, power was just in a few people's hands: Pompey the Great, Marcus, Crassus, and Julius Caesar. Their power was excreted through agents, military force, the mob, and money. Now, I haven't talked about the mob much, but in Rome, gangs were pretty rampant because, remember, there was no military force there. Senators hired gladiators for protection to move around the city. They wanted no legionaries in Rome. The Senate's refusal to make reasonable concessions to these 3 men aforementioned forced these men into the alliance. But remember, any concessions that they would have given to any of them would have strengthened one of them, which the Senate could not have. From the Republicans' view of Cicero and Cato, the situation was seen as either way they maneuvered, there was no happy outcome. So unofficially, the 3 formed the first triumvirate. Remember, the triumvirate is a modern term. Back then, it was just this alliance. This alliance was not legally recognized by the Senate as men in power, but these 3 individuals held all the power. And that's it on what I have to say about the Triumvirate. They're doing as they please, and that moves us into chapter 12, the Second Gallic Wars. Now, these wars raged from 58 to 52 BC. There was 10 major battles, and there was 2 more battles in Britain. Caesar became proconsul of Cisalpine Gaul and Illyria in 59. Now, one could make arguments that the Gallic Wars of Caesar were either politically driven or for the security of Rome. A case could be made for both. Unlike Crassus's war against the Parthians, which was obviously for personal benefit, Caesar's war on the Gallic tribes could be argued it was to secure Rome's border, and there was good reason to post forces on this frontier because German and Gallic tribes were on the move again, and memories of the Cimbri migration were only a half a century old back in 105 BC. Now, as mentioned earlier, the Helvetii were already feeling pressure from the North German tribes. When the Suebi started interfering in Helvetii tribal disputes, they became afraid of being isolated from the rest of Gaul. So, they turned westward. Caesar, basing his response to this move on the grounds that the Helvetii allied with the Cimbri once before and inflicted a humiliating defeat on Rome, said no. Caesar, he had obtained the right from the Senate to protect his Gallic allies, so he was in the right to help, and some say He even allowed the Helvetes into Gaul so he could have an excuse to intervene and have a military victory. But that's hearsay. Now the Helvetii asked Caesar for his permission to move through the Transalpine Gaul, which was an easier route to get into Gaul. Caesar delayed for 15 days to give him a response. Now Caesar did this, I believe, so he could move his 10th Legion to block the Helvetii, and once the 10th Legion was in place and started building fortifications, he then told the Helvetii they could not move through here. The Helvetii had no choice, but they had to turn around and go back from where they came, and then they made the more difficult crossing over the mountains into Gaul at this route. Now, why the Helvetii were doing that, Caesar managed to bring up his 3 other legions he had in Cisalpine Gaul to join together with the 10th and move into Gaul. Now this brought Caesar's total to about 33,000 legionaries plus the auxiliaries. Now at this time, the Helvetii went into Gaul and they were raiding the settlements, and the Gauls pleaded for help. So Caesar intervened. Now, as the Gauls were crossing the river, they were such a huge force, it took time, and they were crossing over in groups. Well, the rear guard group was still on this side of the Saône River, and Caesar attacked them and destroyed them. The groups on the other side of the river could do nothing but watch this group get annihilated. The rest of the Helvetii just moved on. Caesar then built a bridge, and he crossed the river in one day. Now, the legionaries crossed this river in one day when it took the Celts 20 days. That's how efficient these Roman legionaries are. Again, I can't ever give them too much credit. They were an awesome force. Now, for the next 2 weeks, Caesar follows them around and they skirmish here or there. They became involved in a decisive battle at Bibracte, and this was fought over supplies in this village area. Now, we believe the Helvetii had anywhere from 60 to 90,000 fighting men, so Caesar was definitely outnumbered at least 2 to 1. And so he took up a defensive position at the Jura Mountains. And he had spread out his lines a little bit farther than usual because the Helvetii were so numerous, and Caesar wanted to make it look like he had more men. And he had raised 2 new legions, so he had a total of 6 legions here for his 33,000 men. He put the newly formed legions back on the hill and his more veteran legions out in front. Now, the Helvetii, they were packed tight, put their shields together at like a shield wall, and they advanced on the Romans. And the Romans threw their pilum at them. Now remember, the pilums, they were made to bend at the necks, so when the pilum stuck in the Helvetii shields, they all bent, and the shields became cumbersome, and they had to drop most of their shields. So once they engaged, the Helvetii formations became loose, and so the Romans' first 2 lines engaged in hand-to-hand combat, and the fighting was tough, but the Helvetii were pushed back. But as they were being pushed back, some 15,000 of their allies had showed up that were actually protecting the baggage train, and this gave the Helvetii renewed strength, and they start pushing back on the Romans. And the Roman lines were starting to break and have a tough go at it as they were being pushed back. But just then, Caesar, he had to commit his final line of the veterans, and they pushed the Helvetii back, all the way back into their makeshift camp, which they had nowhere to go after that, and they started running right into the camp. And the fighting was most fierce at this camp, though, because the barbarians were set behind their wagons, and as the Romans were pushing through the wagons, they were just jumping on the Romans from the top and just hurling themselves onto them. A very vicious fight went on here. Now, the veterans, though, broke into the camp, and the Helvetii finally broke. This battle lasted for 12 hours. Now, the Romans lost about 5,000 men. They believe the Helvetii lost 40 to 60,000. Now, the Helvetii migration with all their peoples, they figure was about 360,000. So after this loss and that first group, they figured there was about 130,000 left. Now, Caesar rested his men at Bibracte for 3 days, and then he followed the Helvetii. And when the Helvetii realized the Romans were following them, they surrendered. And then Caesar moved them back to their original lands in Switzerland. Now, this was a skillful maneuver by Caesar because it would have been lucrative to sell them. Because now remember, anytime a Roman commander conquered peoples or nations, they could sell. The slaves belonged to them, the commanders, and for them to sell and to gain wealth as they please. You know, the land, the resources, that went to Rome, you know, the Senate and the people of Rome, but the generals could sell the slaves and make money off them. But Caesar didn't do that because when he moved them back to Switzerland, he had the far-sightedness to leave the Helvetii as a buffer between him and the German tribes on the other side. Now, this wouldn't have made very much sense to do this unless Caesar had plans to deal with the Germans. But at any rate, instead of, you know, as people say, he's a glory seeker, well, he didn't get all this wealth. You know, he chose not to take all the wealth, but he used them in a strategic position. Now, let me just say this. All of the Gallic Wars come from Caesar's commentaries. In them, he showed how each campaign was in the best interests of the Republic. Now, by Roman standards, he probably was right. His only known criticism was a breach of a truce with a Gallic tribe for which his opponents in the Senate tried to charge him for, but the motion was never in any real danger of being passed. He released his commentaries by one campaign each season, in the winter after each campaign. And he did this to keep the plebes in his favor, for the politics in Rome, you know, is brutal. And to keep Crassus and Pompey from using propaganda against him when they eventually became the consuls. Now, the commentaries in each season depicted Caesar as a distinguished, loyal servant of the Republic. So this is what the Roman people are reading. This is what they believe. Now, of course, you know, modern historians, they try to dispute this fact, and they try to say that, you know, a lot of his commentaries are exaggerated and lies. However, even though all of his actions were portrayed in a favorable light, but to write complete deception is probably not true at all, like these historians claim. Because even though he exaggerated the enemy forces and his own, as well as his own losses, but we do know for sure that his officers were in regular correspondence with friends and family back in Italy, so any major distortions of the facts would have soon been revealed. Caesar's commentaries on the operations of himself as well as his legions were filled in his narrative, so it was probably even more inspiring to contemporary Romans reading of the heroism of their soldiers. Now, it also must be pointed out from the beginning there was a concerted diplomatic and political program directed at the tribal leaders. Caesar would gather all the tribal chieftains regularly to work out agreements or grievances. Appeals from the leaders gave Caesar the pretext for most of his campaigns in Gaul. Allied tribes also made his military operations possible because they supplied his troops, especially with cavalry, and most of all, they supplied him with food and fodder. So Caesar would have not been able to succeed in Gaul unless he did have the Gauls on his side and that they wanted him there. So just remember all that when you're reading stuff about Caesar and how his commentaries may be full of lies and stuff like that, or he may not be a great commander. Because I'll tell you right now, he got lucky a lot, but he was a good commander. And enough can't be said about the Roman legionnaire, who just time after time after time, the discipline and the training won out over hordes and masses of barbarians. Now, what takes place here is the Battle of Vesontio. Now, what we have here is once again the Sequani tribe and the Aedui tribe that were allied with Rome. They had asked Rome for help, and Caesar was told, remember, to help the Gallic allies. So again, here's another battle that he's in the right. Now, Arius Vadas, he was a leader of the Suabi tribes from Germany, and he was a friend of Rome originally, but in 58, 120,000 Suebi were in Gaul because they had started coming over the Rhine, and they wanted to settle in the Sequani land. Now, Caesar was visited by the Gallic consul, and he was happy to oblige their invitation to help. But Areovatus was a friend of Rome's, so Caesar could not just go start attacking them. He had to get approval from the Senate, and he had to meet with Areovatus. So the first meeting was set up, and Areovatus, he had declined the meeting. But Caesar had informed him if he would stop taking prisoners of the Sequani, then and stop his hostilities, then that would be the end of it. But Areovatus had sent Caesar a word back that, hey, if the Romans can go into Gaul and, take land, then so could he. And so he continued to pillage. So Caesar once again found reason to fight Areovatus. Now, the town of Veneto was another town that both sides were looking to get supplies from, and both armies were heading to it. And Areovatus was impressed by the speed with which the Romans marched. Caesar marched night and day, and he got there first. So at this point, Areovatus decided to set up some talks, and most likely it was just to stall the Romans. And the talks didn't go very well, and at one point Areovatus told Caesar that if he were to kill him, the people back in Rome would really be like that and be grateful. So you knew Areovatus knew about the political situation in Rome. Now, that was the end of those talks. Then they met a second time, but Caesar felt this time that Areovatus was going to capture him and kill him, so he only sent his interpreters. And this upset Areovatus, and he arrested the interpreters. Now, he thought about putting them to death, but he did not. Now, battle was imminent, and when Caesar's legion saw the sight of the German force, they became scared, and they were almost on the brink of mutiny, except for Caesar's 10th Legion, his corps d'elite. And Caesar said, fine, I will just take the 10th and go into battle, and we'll handle it ourselves. Now, this actually had shamed the other legions, and they would be known as cowards after this. So they felt, hey, if Caesar's going to go into battle here with them, that kind of emboldened them. They didn't want to be known as cowards, and so they joined with Caesar at this battle. Now, this battle is also sometimes referred to as Mulhausen. Now, Caesar had set up camp in this river position to protect himself, but Areovatus just simply went around to the other side to cut off Caesar's supply line of communications. So now that he had Caesar cut, Caesar was waiting for the battle, and he was offering battle where he was at, but Areovatus was simply happy to sit there and wait for Caesar's men to become desperate or starving. So he just waited it out, and about 5 days went by. So Caesar decided to build a camp closer to Areovatus, but also where he could establish his supply lines. So he moved up 4 legions to this camp and kept 2 in the back, and he started using his light infantry and his cavalry to start holding off any assault from the barbarians while he was fortifying the camp. Now, Areovatus, he only sent his light infantry and his cavalry out to attack. Why? Because Caesar had found out from fighting these skirmishers that the priest had told Areovatus that he was to not send his whole army into a battle until the next full moon. So Caesar found this out, and that's why Areovatus right here only sent in his skirmishing force, and he didn't want to get engaged in a battle. And Caesar succeeded in getting this camp. Once this camp was built, he left 2 legions there, and he sent the other 4 back. Or he sent the other 2 back. He had 4 legions at the main camp. So since Caesar found this out about the full moon thing, Caesar went into the battle, and he attacked Areovatus. Now, Caesar set up his typical 3 lines with the skirmishing forces in the front. Now, Caesar was on the right. Now, both sides had charged each other, but as the Romans, how they usually throw their pilum, but at this time the barbarians had charged with such ferocity and such speed that the Romans didn't have time to even get to pile them out and throw them. They just had to grab their swords, their shields, and get ready for the onslaught. Now, at this point, panic started to occur in the Roman ranks, but Caesar's charismatic leadership and fearlessness, which he communicated to his 10th Legion, his corps d'elite, soon rallied the men. But the right was in danger of being broken. In the reserve was Publius Crassus. This is Marcus Crassus' son. He noticed that the Roman right was about ready to collapse. And just then, he sent the cavalry in and he charged over there to save the right. If it wasn't for Crassus here, the whole Roman right could have been destroyed. Caesar could have possibly been killed, and that would have probably been into the Gallic Wars. But Crassus did save the day here. They managed to surround the Suebi on the right. The center was getting pushed back a little bit, but it's pretty much just stalemate there. But because the right collapsed, the Suebi saw this and they ran. Now, the deaths are unknown, that how many Germans died here. But as they attempted to withdraw through their camp, the Romans were able to totally rout them. Now, Ariovistus withdrew back across the Rhine and he never returned. So I think this shows us, out of the 60 to 90,000 men he had, a lot of them, and I mean a lot of them, were dead. Caesar even said the dead were so compact they couldn't even fall over. That's how compact the fighting was at the end. So what Caesar did now was he wintered in Burgundy and he rebuilt his legions. Now, usually in the winters before, Caesar would usually go back to northern Italy, but this time he stayed in the Sequani and the Audi lands. And this kind of built a little bit resentment, and the Gallic tribes started to think, the Romans are staying here, maybe they have other designs and maybe they want to control us. So this kind of built up some resentment for the next campaign season in the following year when 57 comes up. Let's just remember this. In just 2 battles, Caesar had defeated 2 of the most feared German tribes, the Helvetii and the Suebi. So his prestige and the Roman legions was a force to be feared. And not to mention back in Rome, how popular and what a hero Caesar was becoming, because remember, he would send his commentary homes and the Roman people would read this stuff. I think I'm going to end the video here. Okay, we just started the Gallic Wars. When we come back, we will start the 57 BC campaign season and more with the Gallic Wars.